plant ecology, plant anatomy, morphology, a bunch of other words that I can throw out there. I'll throw out a bunch of jargon
Yep.
right now to talk about some of the work that I did for my dissertation, some of the work I do now. I study this plant family called Boraginaceae. I guess I would say, if you've heard of it.
What is special about that plant?
Post on Mo's Facebook page about that.
What is special about that plant?
Well, when I was interested in, so the reason that I began studying Boraginaceae was because I began studying this genus in it called Lithospermum, which means stone seed. We actually have a couple, 4, 5 in in Michigan, and it has this interesting type of breeding system called heterostylene, which is where there are where the sexual organs of the flowers are at different heights. So in one morph, the anthers are above the stigma, and the other stigmas are above the anthers, and only sexual organs of the same height are compatible. So
you started studying that.
So I started studying that. Became interested, I guess, when I was your guys' age in that, and started studying in graduate school.
Okay.
And actually, so heterostyle is not uncommon. There are a number of plants that people are probably familiar with that are heterostylous that people don't know about, like buckwheat. Don't know why that's really the one that I decided to start with. Buckwheat, primulas. What else is there? The most, if you know purple loosestrife, that's a pretty nasty invasive species. That's heterostylous. And the most economically important heterostylous plant is erythroxylum coca, which is the plant from which cocaine is derived from. So it might not be the most legitimate economically important plant, but it is.
So currently you're studying that. That's
I'm studying the breeding system, the evolution, development.
We'll talk about evolution for sure. That's a big area of interest.
In all of that.
Right. All right, Mr. Logan Biochemistry, can you talk about your area of research in undergrad and some of your interests in biochemistry?
So my interest in undergrad was, I was pre-med, so I did a lot of biochemistry research in pharmaceuticals, and I did my thesis on some quality stuff at the hospital, on surgical site infections. And I would say while I was in college, though, most of my focus and most of my interest was in medicinal chemistry and things like that.
Sounds good.
With Dr. Wang and
other faculty at Kettering University. Sounds good. Dr. Cohen, tell us a little bit about ecology. That's like a word that a lot of people have heard of but don't know the meaning of.
Oh man, I hope that I can get the meaning of it. So I would think ecology is the study of ecosystems, the study of the natural world on some level. There are a lot of different ways of looking at it. I think it kind of comes down to how you want to go about defining what an ecosystem actually is. So for some people, ecosystem can be something that's very small, a drop of water, a puddle, parts of the soil. But for other people, it is something really large. They can focus on the biosphere, continental types of processes that are occurring. When I guess I will go back to when I was your guys' age, in taking my ecology classes, I learned a lot about sort of boundaries of ecosystems and nested ecosystems from a landscape ecosystem approach. And that has been one of the ways that I have thought about ecology in this landscape ecosystem approach.
Okay.
So ecosystems have these boundaries. They are three-dimensional areas that include sort of what we're standing on, what we see above us. And so they would include abiotic, biotic components.
When I was, yes.
Everything like that.
Right. When I was actually, thought comes into mind. When I was talking to somebody, I was like, today I'll have a plant biologist. And that person's comment was, I suck at biology because biology is a lot of memorization. Do you agree with that statement?
So I think that any subject involves memorization to some extent. I mean, to use, I guess, an example with students at Kettering, a lot of students, as we probably all know, are engineering students to some extent and use math. Mm-hmm. When did you guys start learning numbers? I mean, my daughter's starting to learn numbers. She can count to 15 or so, getting about at least 13 of those numbers correct.
Right.
And she's 3. So you guys, people have been learning numbers since they really started to be able to talk. If and then think about if you started to learn another language. You guys speak? Yeah.
Definitely.
So, I mean, if you think about when you start to learn another language, if you started learning when you were a kid, it's much easier.
Right.
If you started learning it in junior high, like I did, trying to learn Spanish,
yes,
your family wonders how it is even possible for you to test out of any classes when you got to college.
Right.
And so whenever you're trying to learn a new subject that you haven't encountered recently or regularly, it becomes challenging. And so a lot of so when you get to college and you start learning your engineering, for example, or if you've been coding and you start taking computer science classes, you really get to jump into the fun stuff immediately. But there are probably classes that you took that you're like, okay, I sort of know how to code in this language or that language. I don't need to know how to do this. Or, I don't need to know I know how to add and subtract.
Certainly.
But if you aren't familiar with biology or the language of biology, then you need to get up to speed. And we all have to do it. It's the same if you are taking a botany class. Even if you know a lot about biology, there's a lot of specific botanical terminology. I'm still learning botanical terminology, and that's how we talk and communicate.
Right.
And these words have been around for a long time. And
so learning biology is just like learning any skill, like learning to play guitar or
it's just like that, and it takes practice. But then once you get the fundamentals down, then you get to go on, and I wouldn't say necessarily do more interesting stuff, because whoever teaches the general biology course at Kettering does a phenomenal job. But I mean, once you learn those fundamentals, then you can go on and really apply those in more areas. But I think, like I said, if you were someone who didn't really know numbers or addition or subtraction, division, multiplication, and you came to Kettering and you were like, man, these engineering courses are really hard. They want me to learn all these numbers and all these problems.
Yes.
And it's like, well, yeah, because you don't know your numbers, because you don't know any simple arithmetic or algebra. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important just to put it into that type of perspective, which is, sort of where you're starting and where you're trying to get to. So,
I think
Logan, you were a student.
Yeah, just recently. I was just gonna say, I think there's some merit to how advanced you are in the subject, like you were saying. Like eventually, for you, I'm sure you can think of it in sort of in not arithmetic, but in like there's a process, right? Mm-hmm. And eventually you can start to learn these mechanisms, and you can decipher the end of the mechanism by going through it and systematically deciphering it. Like imagine learning how many ATP come out of cellular respiration, right? You still had to memorize, glycolysis to get that far, right? To be able to do the process. And so I don't know, when people say, it irks me a little bit when people say it's all memorization. Well, you're only in Gen Bio, I'm sure.
Yes.
Eventually there is a point when biology is no longer memorization. It is I don't know.
Application.
More application, yeah.
Right.
I would also say that I think it's important to be able to memorize information. I mean, we do it all the time in various ways. I mean, you don't necessarily want to just memorize random information, but the ability to retain information and then to be able to apply it to a new area, to be able to synthesize it, is really important. And so, there's always some sort of regurgitation. Go back and think about when you were learning algebra.
Right.
2x plus 1 equals 7. See, I can do a little bit of math.
Right.
But so you have to learn how that goes, and that's not too hard. Similar, 3 plus 3, 3 times 3, all of that. But being able to retain this information and to be able to apply it, as opposed to saying, hold on, let me go look that up. Or, we all have phones with us now, believe it or not.
Definitely.
As I'm continuing to date myself, we did not have these when I was
right.
in college. And so you couldn't just go to a website when you're talking with your friends and be able to do something like that. And so you needed to know this information to sort of have intelligent conversations. And,
right.
Or in theory, you could all walk over to the library and look it up together.
Definitely. And I think, like, in some areas of science have come under criticism for a few reasons. I think, like, a lot of people realize that science is hard, and they don't take the time to actually learn it. And before we know it, we have a lot of misconceptions about those topics. And currently, there's been a lot of evolution has been on the news lately, and the current Secretary of Education has their views, and it's kind of going back and forth. Should evolution be taught in middle school, high school? And it's just, as a teacher, how do you feel about that? Like, the evidence for, against, like, what is your opinion on the topic of evolution?
I mean, evolution occurs. That's pretty much a fact.
Right.
It is, what we would call a scientific theory, which differs from, if we're talking about theories here, as opposed to hunches. It's a very well proven, and there are plenty of good examples. Actually, there are more than plenty of good examples. There's an abundance of good examples of evolution occurring. I mean, you guys are both interested in medicine, right? So you've probably talked about antibiotic resistance before. I mean, antibiotic resistance is a perfect example of evolution. I mean, this change in allele frequencies, this descent of modification from one generation to the next. And so there's the idea that evolution shouldn't be taught, or that evolution doesn't occur, or on some level only occurs at a small scale, I think is, falls into the category of being a little misguided. And it's all right to not believe in evolution, but it does mean that then there are aspects of sort of what we can observe in our, you probably do this lab, people probably do these labs in molecular biology, where you see antibiotic resistance developing.
Right.
And so, that these are small examples, of course, but this is something that could occur over a day or a few days. And the world has been around for a little bit longer than that. So the idea that we can't have sort of larger mutations occurring, I think it's a little misguided, and I think it's just hard for us. We live 80, 100 years if we're lucky.
At most, yes.
And the idea of fathoming millions, thousands, or
right.
if not millions or billions of years is just hard.
Definitely.
And so
I think so I'll present the counter arguments to that for the diversity of thought. And I think what's neat is that there are various different facets of evolution that people, they kind of pick what they believe in and what they don't. So one thing they believe in is, that antibiotic resistant, that's happening because my doctor said so. They take a new flu shot every few months because that is, that's how they don't get sick. But when it comes to, I remember talking to somebody about it, and that person said, do you actually believe in evolution? Because I don't think I came from an ape. And that argument, what do you have to say? Either one of you can pick that one up.
I think, speaking of misguided,
right,
but things can co-evolve at the same time. There's no reason, just because apes currently exist, like that's always one of the arguments that people who like, I shouldn't say people who don't believe in evolution. I would say, like, the, no pun intended, the guerrilla anti-evolutionists say,
Nice.
they say things like, well, how can apes still be here if we're also here, and how can that work? And
Right.
I think it's very naive. And not to mention, I mean, maybe you can comment on this, Dr. Cohen, but I think humans are we're one of the things that has a missing link, but there's plenty of things that we've shown that don't have missing links, right?
Yeah, and where we're finding the the missing link. I guess this is the radio. You can't see me putting quotes around that.
Yes, big quotes.
So this is something that I talk about in my class, and is the idea that the fossil record, while really, really helpful for understanding what's going on in the pattern of evolution at a really macro scale, millions of years in the past, is just incomplete. And so there are some great examples of these types of missing links where we would see Archaeopteryx, which is a reptile bird. I'll say the word hybrid, but it's not. It's not a hybrid of the two. It is sort of in between the two, which gives us some good evidence that birds are an offshoot of reptiles. And there are other good examples of this. Ambulocetus, which is sort of a whale-like creature with legs, and so we can sort of see that evolutionary progression. And then there are there are plenty of situations where we are like, we just don't have good evidence. In one of my favorite groups of plants, the angiosperms, flowering plants just sort of appeared about 130 million years ago and are in the fossil record. And Darwin had this great quote calling the origin of the angiosperms an abominable mystery. Which,
can you define that term?
Abominable mystery?
Right.
It's a great Victorian term for being like, we just don't know what's going on.
Okay.
And Darwin, this is something he said 150-ish, give or take, years ago.
Right.
And we still don't know sort of how the angiosperms came to evolve. We're getting closer. We're learning a lot about the molecular underpinnings of flowers and gaining more information on fossil evidence, being able to use DNA sequence data to understand evolutionary trees. But we still are a long ways to being able to understand that. And similarly with thinking about us evolving from the group that included the great apes, one of the interesting aspects is that our genome is really, really similar to theirs.
Okay.
I don't remember the exact amount. I want to say it's like 98% similar.
Wow.
Someone can Google that and let us know if that's incorrect. But it's very close. And one of the interesting aspects is it's not necessarily the genes themselves that are making us distinct. It is certainly to some extent, but it's also the way in which those genes are expressed throughout our development. We are all, I'm sorry to say, fairly hairy guys right here.
Definitely,
but,
definitely.
No
shame in that.
That's not always the case, and it just sort of has to do with gene expression with some of those situations. But we can take solace in knowing that the great apes are hairier than us. So
right. Yes.
And so while the genes might be very similar, the alleles, those variants of the genes, would differ, and the way in which they would be expressed during development would differ as well. And so some minor changes that we might see in our morphology could be triggered by smaller changes at the genetic level. And when we think about it like that, that you can sort of be using the same toolkit, but building something in a different way, allows you to think that it doesn't have to be a big change that makes us look so different from something
right.
that we might be closely related to, but rather that tweaking it one way here, one way there,
Mm-hmm.
can result in different morphologies, different type of organism.
Okay. Yes.
That's sort of a simple way of putting that.
Mm-hmm. I guess like one big question I always thought about was, in science we have multiple theories. The word theory gets thrown out a lot. Oh, it's just a theory, and it's like gravity's a theory. Go jump off a building and you'll see. But like there are like in terms of theories like Newtonian mechanics and theory of relativity, not a lot of people question that. But when it comes to evolution, almost everybody has an opinion, and I wonder why is that? Like why do people pick and choose some part of science and some is not, and it always just, I do not understand that.
I think that people in the context of evolution, I think people are, tread lightly here. I think that there are a lot of people with certain strong beliefs that are almost to some extent offended by the possibility that science took control of the outcomes that we see here on Earth.
Yes.
And that, in fact, they feel offended that we prefer that idea to something that has less explanation. I mean, Dr. Cohen just went in a pretty in depth and was able to articulate plenty about evolution, right? But there's not, we can see it. And I think to say otherwise just on your personal beliefs.
I wonder when Darwin came up with the theory, how was the reaction at the time?
That I don't know much about. It's interesting. Things were definitely turning, at least in the scientific community around that time. There was another.
And what time period is this again?
Oh man! So Darwin came up with this. Darwin's journey on the beetle was 1830, 1840-ish.
Okay.
But he didn't end up publishing his ideas until the latter part of the 1850s, early part of the 1860s. I definitely rely on a slide for this.
Yes.
to get my timeline correct.
Mm-hmm.
But there was another researcher at the same time who was working out in Southeast Asia, Wallace, who came up with the same idea essentially in parallel. And the two of them ended up presenting it together to the Royal Society. And things were starting to change then with our understanding of evolution, and then that really began to, I don't know if I want to say ramp up, but become improved on in sort of the early, I guess the latter part of the first half of the 1900s.
We have a question, and question is, what does evolution look like for the future of the human race? I know that question will involve some level of prediction, but what is your best?
I think we've seen a number of interesting documentaries about this recently.
Oh,
X-Men. No, I'm just joking about that a bit, but I don't think we know. One of the challenging aspects of this is being able to is to predict what's going to happen, and we just get a snapshot. Imagine thinking about this 100,000 years ago.
Okay.
What would you have thought about where we'd be today? And it's hard to think about that because now we're able to travel much more than we were before. We have air travel, so we're
our genes are...
So we're able to have children with people
from a different continent.
That we meet people that we otherwise wouldn't have, and so some of the, I don't know, inbreeding is the wrong word to use, but breeding within a restricted population isn't occurring in the same way. We're much more cosmopolitan in general. But in terms of what will look like, or if there will be significant changes in the next 20 or 100, 500 years, the one thing that we do see occurring now has to do with fertility. And so
Oh, wow.
people are able to have children later. I'm not going with talking about anything related to designer babies. I want my hair to have my hair. I want my child to have a particular hair color or eye color.
Right.
But that it's possible to have children later in life. It is possible to, I guess for lack of a better way to say it, correct mutations that are occurring even at the level of the mitochondria. So if there is a disease that would prove fatal,
right,
we can catch that and deal with it. And so we're able to deal with children who have, or people who have, severe allergies.
I think you could say, on one hand, you could say that we're starting to inhibit natural selection a little bit because we're consistently, because these otherwise, like you said, otherwise fatal mutations, we're able to prolong that life, a lot more so a lot of times to the point of reproduction. Look at like Huntington's and things like that. You don't find out until you're 30, and you may have already had kids, or familial Alzheimer's. But at the same time, you could argue that our evolution is the ability to make those corrections and to thrive longer.
Are we like playing with natural selection by having such advanced medicine and having these measures that can, let us know if a child will have, this disease or not later in life by doing some genetic testing when they're born?
But what if that is our natural selection?
What if that is our... Okay.
You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
But I mean, we are one way or another, even if it is benefiting us as a society, which I guess I can say it is. I mean, we have increased the ability for us to survive for longer, and and so it's interesting because once you get to a particular age now, you're not, or at least those of us that are in the developed world in general, are not dying because of some sort of
flu
outbreak. Yeah, flu in general, cholera, anything like that.
Right.
That might be very detrimental, or would have been detrimental to our ancestors 500 years ago, if not more, or less, actually. So we're having different problems. I mean, you guys would be at the latter part of your life now, probably, or at least you'd be middle-aged.
Right.
I'd be, on an ice float somewhere. So we've been able to advance in a relatively short period of time. Vaccines are really important for that, and allowing for us to be able to have this type of society, to be able to live.
You mentioned right. You mentioned vaccines. That's also another big topic. And how did that start? I guess like the rumor that is like some scientist wrote a paper and he was highly biased, and then people associated.
It's no rumor. That's exactly what happened.
Okay.
It was a physician, Andrew Wakefield, wrote this paper and essentially said there's a link between vaccines and autism and colon cancer, and he was able to. He turned that into a large profit for himself, or he was I won't even say coerced. He was implored, I guess. It was very lucrative,
right,
for him to say that,
because now we're to a point where like people admit, openly say they don't believe in vaccines, or they're not going to vaccinate their child. Why would I? And it's, I guess, like, what's the counter argument to that? Like, what is the explanation?
People that don't vaccinate their children are able to piggyback on the fact that the majority of us do vaccinate our children. If we went back to a time when people were not vaccinating their children and vaccines weren't possible, people would want to have vaccines available. At least the majority of people would want to have vaccines available because they are life-saving. You do not want your child to be able to get a disease that would either be debilitating for them for their life, or something that would essentially kill them or kill them. And so it's really scary thinking about this and thinking about going back to a time when that wouldn't be possible. That's not to say that getting measles or mumps or anything like that is, a death sentence, but it certainly is something that is not going to be, well, has the potential to be deadly. And so it is very beneficial to vaccinate to vaccinate in general.
So I guess like a good question here is that I keep forgetting, we're all scientists here, we have formal education in this, but what is inside a vaccine? That's been a topic that, actually the president tweeted about that.
Of the United States.
Exactly. And so if you can explain like what is inside a vaccine and give us some detail on that.
So vaccines, there are a couple different types, or I guess there are sort of live and dead vaccines. I think I'm getting that right. I'm not a microbiologist, but the idea is
give it your best shot.
I'll do my best.
Right.
But the idea is essentially that you're giving the immune system a little bit of the disease, that it's not going to necessarily kill you, but what it's going to do is have your immune system respond to it. And that is then going to keep these immune cells, these memory B and T cells in your body, circulating around. And so when you get the disease, if that happens, this is why you get a flu shot. This is, if you get the flu, then you will have or the hope is that you would have the B and T memory B and T cells that would then be able to have sort of an explosive response.
Because they'll be ready to go back.
They'll be ready. You've already got them ready to go, and they'll be able to undergo mitosis to be able to produce more of them and fight off the disease much more quickly in this sort of secondary immune response than would occur during the primary immune response, where you need to figure out essentially what it is that is going to be able to attack the disease.
So when you get the vaccine, your primary immune response kicks in.
Yeah, and then you'll save those cells. People can't see me putting quotes. Save those cells for if you get infected again, a secondary response to that.
So that is very interesting because a lot of talk has been going out around the flu vaccine. A lot of healthy people claim they've never gotten the vaccine and they're perfectly fine. And I guess I don't know how to defend against it or be angry at anybody about that because that is totally their right. Do you have to say something about that?
Well, Dr. Cohen already explained exactly why that is.
Right.
It's because everybody else does get vaccinated. Number one. Number two, a lot of those people do get the flu. It's not like they aren't getting the flu at all. They get the flu, and because they're already adults, they make it through the flu because it's not that deadly to an adult. And then they don't get it again because now they have
another important one, the current president of the United States. I just keep bringing him up because he is the current president, and he is in public office, and we should, just a few years ago, his current sentiment stays the same, and he tweeted, he said, "I'm not against vaccinations for your children, I'm against them in one massive dose. Spread them out over a period of time, autism will drop." I hate to be somebody that's laughing, but does that even make sense? Is that even scientifically one big dose versus spread out the doses?
They are spread out.
Yeah, I was going to say they aren't given in one big dose. That's the whole idea of health maintenance. They're given over time. There's levels, and there is it's
right.
Wrong.
This misinformation.
It is.
That is very interesting. We have a question, and it's opinion on vaccine additives and their relation to inflammatory responses in the body. If you know anything about it.
That I do not know anything about vaccines and
they talked about
the inflammatory response.
They talked about mercury being an additive for a while, but it wasn't like pure mercury, like the kind that comes in a thermostat that people get cancer from, and And I think just mostly to appease those people, they removed it anyways.
They removed it?
Yeah, a lot of the heavy metals that used to be in it, they removed. Because they weren't, now the science is advanced enough that they don't need them for the inoculation or to stabilize. Usually it was like to stabilize these shells.
Can you define inoculation?
I believe it's like a rudimentary term for vaccinate.
For vaccination or for getting the virus or the bacteria ready to be essentially cultivated and grown.
Right. I think that's better. That is pretty neat. What is the difference between microevolution versus macroevolution? A lot of people don't understand that difference. You can.
Well, I don't know if I would necessarily distinguish between the two either, but people who do would be microevolution would be more at the population level.
Okay.
Where if we're thinking about what's going to happen to humans within the future, that would be a good example of something that could be considered microevolution.
Okay.
Macroevolution would be what's going on at a larger scale. How are we thinking about speciation of multiple groups? If I'm thinking about speciation in Boraginaceae, I'm thinking more about macroevolution.
Okay.
And in theory, there could be different processes that might be operating at a micro versus a macro scale, but I think there's some. We don't need to go there now. I think a lot of the same types of processes that are occurring at a micro level are resulting in these macro processes as well, and it just has to do a lot more with time and scale than there being more of a clear-cut boundary between micro versus macroevolution.
So you can't believe in one or the other, right?
Well, see, people are able to do that, but that's where people are able to do that. People allow themselves to be able to do that, and that is, people will say, I believe in microevolution. That's why I can believe in antibiotic resistance or pest resistance of a particular agricultural crop. But I can't believe in macroevolution. That's not something that would occur.
That's the big picture, coming from the apes, as we discussed.
Yeah, but it really just has to do with time. I mean, we can't really think that, we can't think on that type of time scale. And so, I mean, when you can think maybe about a decade.
Right.
Or, 100 years, a century, but thinking about a millennium or, multiple millennia is just hard to really think about what's going on.
For human mind to even comprehend.
Yeah, and so the idea that, okay, well, here we have a bunch of E. coli in a petri dish, and we'll come back in, a couple of years and, they'll have wings on them, is unlikely.
Is unlikely. That is pretty interesting. Somebody asked a question about what we were talking about earlier, and it said that globalization results in racial mixing. Is it possible that there will only be one race in the future? Is that genetically possible?
It's a South Park episode.
So as someone who doesn't study race, but maybe thinks about it from a biological perspective, I mean, it's kind of a social construct. I mean, if I think about this in terms of, to put this in somewhat less charged terms.
Right.
When we think about it in terms of plants, for agriculture, there would be what you might call land races,
right,
varieties. And then you can breed them together, and if you backcross them, essentially you could swamp them out. So, in theory, that's something, but it really depends on how you're defining, race or land race in terms of plants or anything like that. So,
is it possible or is it not possible?
I can't. It really depends on where you're going to draw your lines.
Right.
And so,
even theoretically,
circles around these boundaries.
I guess even theoretically, do we even know? I guess that question is very one-sided, but in a bigger picture of that whole scenario where we have so much people traveling from here to Asia, from Africa, gene mixing, that is something new to the human
Yeah.
species. And does that even change anything, I guess, at the end of the day? Because then the argument is we're all based on the same nucleotides, ACTG. So it's just,
It probably involves. It probably has a larger effect culturally than biologically.
culturally and biologically.
Would be my.
That is very neat statement right there.
Glad I can come up with a neat statement.
No, that is a very neat statement because biology is biology. That is, science is like hard science, and
Well, there's the hard sciences and the soft sciences, and I think that's the distinction, right? So
Right.
you had
Social sciences.
or yeah. Well, that's when I took sociology with Dr. Pauly, who you had on here before.
last time.
We did a lot in the class about discussing, as he called them, soft sciences.
Okay. Well, if he did it,
right, and so that's
I'm
how
okay with it.
exactly.
Yes. No, he was here last week, and we were talking about affluent water crisis and different issues like that. But
I have a question for you really quick, actually, on the topic of evolution. So,
Okay.
it being that you're a plant biologist, what do you believe the contribution of genetically modified plants?
GMOs.
Yeah, on evolution. If we're going to talk about hot topics.
Well, it's interesting because we have been, as humans, domesticating plants for a really long time, and there's a whole lot of interesting. Plant domestication is really a cool topic. Thinking about how on some level, how we were like, you know what, I'd really like to eat this. What can I do to make it better for me to eat? Because some things, like, we probably all like chocolate.
Oh, yes.
Chocolate's good.
Whew.
I mean, have you guys had chocolate when it's not sweetened or anything? I mean, it's not very good. It's bitter, and so it's weird to me. And I'm sure that someone was like, "This is great. This is just what I need from cooking," but it's not something that I think would be something I'd want to domesticate initially. And there are other plants like that. So when people think about, this is slightly different, of course, but when people think about, we haven't modified plants, well, we have modified them. We've done a lot of selective breeding. We still do a lot of selective breeding to ensure that plants are producing bigger fruit, to ensuring that they are growing taller or shorter or in a particular ecosystem. And genetic modification is one tool that breeders can use for that. There are issues surrounding it in terms of patents and releasing pollen into the wild, and people that don't want GMOs in their food, but then things they don't know about it, and then pollen from one gets into the stigma of another, and so you have a hybrid that's occurring that no one is happy about because the company doesn't want you to have their patented genes, and you're like, farmers that don't want them are like, I don't want them to begin with. So
is there enough scientific research that says GMOs are safe?
It depends on where you're coming down on it. So, what level are we talking about if we eat them? Because, in general, we can eat them. But it depends on that. Are they safe ecologically? I think that the jury is still out on that. Although I'm not up enough on the research on that to say definitively one way or the other, but I think that we're still learning about it, and we're getting better at being able to modify and be involved with the genetics for the plants. So from sort of a biological or ecological perspective, there are challenges that come with it. And then there's a whole host of other challenges that come when we think about it from a social point of view. And those might even, on some level, be more challenging, because just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. And if we do something, it doesn't mean that people are going to then want to use it. So I realize this is sort of a non-answer to your question, but the idea that I think it's interesting. When I was in graduate school, I was in a plant biology program, And being a systematist and someone who's more interested in evolution and not at the bench quite so much, I was on the crunchier side of things. But a lot of people I was in graduate school with that were in my program, were very pro GMO. They were working on understanding genetics and molecular biology of plants, and it was interesting, having conversations with them, and made me start to think much more about that idea that we've been breeding for a long time. I think I knew that before, but the idea that these people who you think are actively studying plants, really into it, they're out in the field, they might be against that. They had a very different point of view because they were working with the plants, they were trying to make things safer, they're trying to feed people. I mean, that's one of the big goals of genetic modification. The goal of agriculture is making sure that we can feed everyone. And you can say, well, there's enough food to go around, we just need to get it from here to there, but that's the big problem. We need to get it from here to there. And so if we can find better ways of making plants, of breeding plants so that they are already there and making so that we don't have to worry about distribution, then life becomes a lot easier. And as sort of the climate changes, we would be able possibly to keep up more with that.
Is that even real?
Another one.
Another one. See, like, there's so many topics that right now they're so interconnected.
But here's the interesting thing is I feel like sitting at this table with you guys, they all seem relatively obvious. And you wonder why there are groups of people who would bet their life on the idea that GMOs are dangerous.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The jury's still out.
Dangerous to eat, I mean.
Oh, so I think we have a luxury of being able to make those types of decisions. And other people don't necessarily have the ability to do that. And so if you don't want to eat genetically modified food, I think that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you don't think it's safe, you don't want to feed it to your family, I think that's perfectly acceptable. No one's going to force you to eat GMOs.
Right.
But some people, it's not a choice between whether they get that at the grocery store or not. It's a choice of whether the food is available in the first place to eat. And if we can, if there is a way to make life easier, to make agriculture easier, to make food better, to make food more nutritious for people in which food is hard to come by, that's a really good thing to do and a really worthwhile goal. And it's great, on the other hand, to have the luxury to be able to say that that's not something that you want to do. And that's a perfectly acceptable way.
It sounds like
to
a pretty much a first world problem where we have choices, and that's great. Like in other countries where there's already scarcity of food, and then GMOs being giving them a solution to that problem. I feel like it's much less an issue in developing countries, in countries where food is scarce, than in countries like
I would agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we, if we're able to do that without genetic modification, that's great too.
Right. Somebody asked genetic modifications in humans. We kind of touched on that. I guess my only question is, do you see any problem with that in the future?
Just wait.
Just wait. Time will tell.
No, I think it will end up happening.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, we see it a bit already. I was talking about this before, about these mitochondrial diseases that people are able to, rather than having, so usually, pretty much all situations I know of in animals, mitochondria are inherited from your mom. So it's maternal. But what can happen is you can get your chromosomes, your nuclear chromosomes from your mom and your dad, and then they can give you, scientists, researchers, can give you mitochondrial chromosomes, mitochondria, from a donor, essentially. So rather than having two genomes or two sets of or genomes from two people in your body, you would have a third one.
Right.
And so that's something that we can do, and that seems something that is very reasonable to be able to do, to allow people to have children that otherwise might not be able to, or to sort of prolong the life of children. I don't know that much about mitochondrial diseases. I think actually I've exhausted my knowledge of mitochondrial diseases right now.
Right.
But I mean, we see that as testing is done, we become more, or at least a segment of the population becomes more comfortable with various things that 20, 30 years ago we might not have been very comfortable with, even if it's sort of at a small scale. If we think about stem cell research, that was something that was controversial a long time ago. I guess it probably is still controversial, but it is something that's still going on. And just because in the U.S. we might say, you know what, we don't want designer babies, we don't want people to go and select for the alleles that would give a certain eye color or for a particular height, for example, or something along those lines. It doesn't mean that that's going to be the case everywhere.
Right.
And so, if we are, so people, other areas might take advantage of that. And I obviously don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me if within our lifetime something like that is much more socially acceptable.
Wow. So like social versus biology, I guess. Back to those hard science versus soft science. Another question, so a lot of our audience is college students who are, graduating college or are in college and think about graduate school. You went through graduate school. You teach at a college now, so I'm sure you have some perspective on that. What made you go to a graduate school? Get your PhD.
I wanted to be a plant systematist and become a professor.
Okay.
So that's pretty much the only route for being able to do that.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
There aren't too many people that are plant systematists, or there aren't too many people that are plant systematists that don't have doctoral degrees, at least that I know of, unless they are aspiring plant systematists.
So for you, it's kind of a requirement, based on the work you wanted to do.
It's the working degree in the field.
Right.
So it was necessary to go.
So what did you study in undergrad?
I did my undergrad at the University of Michigan down in Ann Arbor, at the School of Natural Resources and Environment, which is a college there that is, believe it or not, smaller than Kettering.
It's college inside the university.
We have colleges now.
Yes.
So,
that's new, yes.
Yeah, so, and I studied resource ecology and management. That was back when they had an undergraduate program at this college, which they no longer do, much to my dismay. Okay.
So then, you had your interest in the area of ecology, biology, and then you realized you wanted to be a plant systematist?
Systematist, yes.
Systematist.
Yes.
And so for students that kind of are on the edge of going to grad school versus not, why should somebody go to a grad school if, I guess in your case, you knew you had to get that degree?
So it depends a lot on what the working degree is in the field. So if the working degree is a master's, so a lot of the graduate students I did my undergrad in School of Natural Resources and Environment, got master's degrees, because that was the working degree in the field.
Mm-hmm.
Overwhelming majority of students were getting their master's degree, because then they could go on and work in policy or work out doing forestry or anything like that. It's important to keep in mind that when you're getting your master's degree, so it's not uncommon now. I took 6 years to get my doctorate. I think that's 5 to 7 is really where you want to think about budgeting your time if you're interested in getting a doctorate. In that period of time, you can go get a master's degree and then go to law school. You can go to business school and then go to law school. You can get a degree in medicine and be 2 years into your residency by that time. So a lot of the other degrees, I don't want to say it's sort of a sprint versus a marathon, because obviously they're all challenging. But the amount of time that you're going to invest in getting your doctoral degree is more than you would in most of these other types of programs. And so you really have to think, is this something that I am dedicated to? Because if you do, there will become times in your second year, third, fourth,
in graduate school,
continuing on throughout, where you're like, did I make this mistake? It's 12 o'clock and I'm still in the lab.
Right.
It is, I've been writing this for the last 4 months and I still have a long ways to go.
Right.
And so it's something that I think you really have to be dedicated to, because otherwise it's going to be really challenging to do. And so you have to have a really good reason for wanting to go, not something like along the lines of, I've been in school for a while.
Yes. I've
been out for a couple of years. It's kind of boring. Maybe I better go back.
Yeah. No, I hear your logic. We're running out of time. We only have 2 more minutes left. I just wanted to say for our audience, if you guys want to listen to Dr. Cohen further, please tell them how they can listen to your podcast.
Oh, so I have a podcast on local Flint plants called Flint Flora. So it is, I don't want to say the best podcast that you'll listen to, but I'm also not going to say that's not.
Right after ours. Yes.
So Flint Flora, you can find it. We're on iTunes. You can go to Flint Podcasting Company.
You just talk about various plants and that's just it?
That's it. We go talk about plants, talk a little bit about botany. A lot of the plants are all, they were all in Flint, although we just did one in Grand Blanc. So that was venturing out. Hopefully we might venture out in the vicinity, but I don't think we'll get out of Genesee County.
So we'll stay local. Keep our business local.
Exactly. So, yeah.
So iTunes,
Flint Podcasting Company. They also have a bunch of other great podcasts out there. So, yeah, you can check it out, and
definitely.
I'd be interested to hear what people have to say about it.
How, I guess one last question. As a professor, how much time do you have to do extra things like podcast?
Well, I consider that to be part of my job. And so while it is something that is separate, it's always kind of funny. I mean, you guys see us in class, you see us,
grading papers
and all of that. And so in reality, that is half, 60% of our job. And the other stuff is everything else we do. Outreach, research, writing, going on radio shows. No, but all of this stuff is mixed up into it. And so one of the great things, which I will plug for a career, is a professor, because you get to do a whole lot of different things and a whole lot of different areas. You get to teach, you get to interact with wonderful, enthusiastic young people, and you get to really follow passion that you have in terms of research and talking about it with other people.
What was the alternative career path that you could have taken?
I don't even know if there necessarily was one. After I decided to become a plant systematist, that was kind of it.
Yes.
I think if I hadn't gone to school for natural resources, I probably would have become a lawyer.
I see. That is very interesting.
It's probably because my father's a lawyer. So.
All right, Dr. Cohen, thanks for coming over today. Logan St. Clair, thank you so much for dropping by. And with that, we'll be ending our show. Thank you for tuning into WKUF LP Plan 94.3 FM radio.
Wait, is this your last show?
Possibly we'll have one next week.
Okay.
But I'm not sure about that yet. Do not have any confirmation from the station yet. But if it is my last, thank you for listening. I'll be in touch one way or the other. You guys will find me. Well, with that, have a great night. So.
Sweet.
Dude, that was good.
The Spanish music.
That was good. So, like, this is rare.